Welcome, everybody, to the Healing Place podcast. I'm your host, Teri Wellbrock, and I'm
Mhm.
excited to have him with me today, Austin Mao. And he is entrepreneur, writer, spiritual guide, founder of Ceremonia, and keynote speaker. So, welcome, Austin.
Thanks, Terry. Happy to be here.
Oh, of course, I told you I'm excited to learn about Ceremonia. But before we go down that road, um, I know when I was on your website and reading through bios and all the about stuff, uh, there was like you stepped into this part of your journey after being with your dad in his transition out of this life. Can you talk to us about that?
Yeah. Um, so 5 years ago, I had my first psychedelic ceremony, right? In that case, it was with a plant medicine called ayahuasca. And about 4 years prior to that, I got to spend the last 6 months of my father's life with him. And we had been estranged most of our life. I grew up single son to a single mom, and would just get to see him once a year or so in Taiwan or China, where he lived. Um, it's very interesting because very recently my dog passed away uh, in December, and um, when I was with that experience, I felt this familiar grief, right? Um, but I felt grief in a much more profound way than I had felt when my father passed. And the meaning making I have from that is that when my father passed 8, 9 years ago, I didn't have the mindfulness, the tools to fully feel my feelings. It was in my first ceremony that, um, well, I'll back up a little bit. Before I went into this retreat that was in Mexico in that time, I had already clocked around 100 psychedelic experiences recreationally, camping with friends, Burning Man, festivals, so on and so forth. Yeah. And so I went in with a chip on my shoulder thinking, what can this show me that, you know, I haven't already experienced, right? And what in my very first ceremony, I had a vision of my father. Now, have you ever had a dream where in the moment you woke up, you're like, am I still in the dream or am I back in reality, right? Because that
Right, for
dream felt
sure.
so vivid, so real. You weren't just observing yourself floating above your body, you were living that experience, right?
Yes.
That's what a psychedelic experience can be like and often is like, and from a visual standpoint. Like I was in an embodied experience of being with my father, introducing to him my then wife. And when I had that, I was, I felt a catharsis that I didn't know I was even missing, right? I thought I had quote unquote properly grieved him, but I didn't know that I was missing the opportunity to share with him my life as it unfolded, the man that I would become, much of which came from the deep impact of being there through his passing. And that was my first ceremony. But surprisingly, that wasn't my most impactful one. The second ceremony is where something really hits. And I speak about this on stage and I've shared it around the world. The short version is that I had very little access to long-term memory. Like my childhood was a total fog. Yeah. But because I had lived with this my whole life, just as people live with trauma their whole life and the after effects of that, it was part of me. I didn't know anything differently, right? You look at like let's say someone who's colorblind and they don't know they're colorblind until they do a little test or they find out somehow because they're not able to distinguish colors that others could see. Same for me. I didn't know what that meant to have the lack of long-term memory. And so under the medicine, I started again like a dream-like trance, re-experiencing my memories, but with vivid detail, like in Technicolor. Like I could turn my locker combination. I could feel the texture of books. I could remember passages in books that I had read, right? And I was going back and back and back in time until I was a child under sheets. And it was total darkness. And then I felt horny. And I was like, I popped up on my yoga mat in the middle of the jungle. It's there's 49 other founders there. This was a founders oriented retreat, entrepreneurial oriented retreat. One guy was running around half naked, yelling, "Why are you trying to kill me?" And I was like, "What is this?" And so when I closed my eyes and went back in, and I realized, and just sort of like um, an alert to the listeners, uh, I realized I was sexually touched as a boy, in a way that no boy should ever have to face. And I was so surprised because I had zero memory of it. But what was clear to me is that that was the mechanism my mind took to protect me as a boy, to protect me from the confusion, the shame, but also the pleasure, right? And then as I started going forward in time in my memory, I started to see the impact of not only that experience of trauma, but also the experience, the knowledge that I had a mechanism of the mind to repress memory. And so I couldn't hold on to long-term relationships. Like I would start hobbies and I wouldn't finish them. And even like, it sounds kind of crazy to say, but even the memories of how much love I shared with my mom as a kid, as a teenager, as a young adult, I had forgotten the full texture of that. Yeah. And I went forward in time all the way to the moment that I was lying on this yoga mat in the jungle. And I had tears in my eyes, and I shared with the facilitator slash shaman what I experienced. And she said, "Oh my God, I'm so sorry." And I said, "No, no, 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 you don't understand. I feel like I was cured of Alzheimer's." Like, and that was the beginning of what I think is the renaissance of my life.
Wow. And I have to say, well, one, thank you. Thank you for sharing your truth. As a survivor of sexual childhood abuse, I applaud you and your courage for when we put our truths out there, how many people can then resonate and say, oh my gosh, like me too. But I also so resonated with my high school friends. Now I've done a tremendous amount of EMDR healing work and just a tremendous amount of healing work, and I've gotten better with the memory part of it. But my high school girlfriends were in a group text and they'll start talking about memories from some of us have been friends since third grade. And they'll talk about things and I'm like, what the heck are they talking about? Because it's true. Like there's just almost like blank spaces or
Totally. Yeah.
clouded. I mean, I know I personally dissociated a lot. That was my go-to was I was out of body, right? Like I was dissociating from so
Same.
much of the trauma that was going on. So yeah, very, very powerful. And gosh, I mean, I love the idea that this, what you said, like reconnects you to your truth. Like it just makes your life more authentic, right?
That's the work, right? The medicine itself doesn't make your life more authentic. It opens the pathway for you to summon the courage to learn the tools, to practice the practice of um, being more true to yourself. And then authenticity, I believe, comes from the expression of you in the truth of yourself, which requires us to face fear, which requires us to let go of the things that we're really attached to, that we feel are so important in our lives, that we fear losing. And once we um, one thing I talk about on stage is building skills and capacity, right? So there's really three pillars to what we do at Ceremonia: mindfulness, skills, and capacity, right? This sorry, skills, capacity, and connection. So the skills are like tools for mindfulness or psychotherapy, right? So mindfulness, thousands of years of tradition of meditation, but also just tuning into my body right now. What am I feeling in my heart, right? And as I become more um, versed in this, what am I feeling in the bottom right corner of my heart? What am I feeling in the interior of my heart? What am I feeling in my extremities? And how does that inform me of what I'm experiencing now? You know? And then the capacity is how much of my content, my emotions, my stories, my beliefs can I handle? When we're low capacity, aka let's say you had a bad night's sleep, you've had a lot of stress, you got to pay your bills, your kids are yelling, right? And we're really low, under-resourced. A small trigger that would normally not bug me. So let's say dishes in the sink, right? No big deal usually. But if I'm really under-resourced, I might get angry in that situation. I'm sure everybody's experienced that, right? When we learn these skills and practice them, we're actually able to build our capacity to hold more of our experience so that things that happen in our normal life that would normally trigger us, we can meet it with a little more lightness and grace and compassion. As that pertains to the psychedelic experience, is, you know, when we're in a in that situation with a partner or just in normal life, um, you could say, okay, I need a pause and go to the room and have some breaths, right? But in a psychedelic experience, a lot of people are afraid of a quote unquote bad trip. Yeah. But the reason why a bad trip
Mhm.
happens is because you're under capacity for the content that's arising. And then, whereas in normal life, waking life, you could fight, flight, or freeze, in a psychedelic experience, you're under the medicine. You cannot escape it, right? And so we begin to resist our experience in that moment, right? You're not actually able to dissociate or run away from or turn off the experience. Does that make sense?
Yeah,
And
100.
so by building our capacity, by practicing the skills, we build our availability for more of the content that we have long suppressed, or in the case that we're talking about, Teri, repressed, right? And so if I was low capacity and I experienced that trauma, what that could have done in me, which it didn't, but it could have done in me, is I could have met it with a lot of guilt and shame and said, why would this happen to me? Or victimhood, let's say, right? Like, how could this happen to me? I don't want to feel this. No, 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 no. And that could turn into a bad trip, right? But instead, what happened for me is that I breathed deeply into it and I was able to feel gratitude for the knowledge, because what it did is it unfolded a blank spot of why I am the way that I am, right? And it added to this depth of clarity of who Austin really is. That's what's available when we take concerted, mindful practice of any type of healing work. You mentioned EMDR and et cetera, right? Like you engage that very mindfully, I imagine. Right? No one forced you into it. The psychedelic experience is an accelerated experience. So it's often related to, some people say 10 years of therapy in 10 hours, some people say 40 years of Zen in 10 hours, right? And I would agree with both of those statements, right? At Ceremonia, we've now had close to 300 people through our program. 96% of them say it's the most transformative experience of their lives. The vast majority of people that come on some sort of pharmaceutical, I can't name the exact number, but just it's the vast majority, never take them again. And that's because it's an accelerated process of really knowing yourself, you know,
Yeah,
but that takes a lot.
yeah. And what's the number? Like I've always heard we use 10% of our brain. I don't know what the number is now, but it's like to me, I'm like, oh, is that all stored in that 90% that and then you can access it? Like to me, it's just so fascinating. But yeah, and saw me raise my hand because I'm that person I think because I had panic attacks for so long, like 25 years of panic attacks and heightened anxiety. I've done the healing work, but I'm like, oh my gosh, what if I do this? And then I start to have a panic attack. So that's why I get scared. I mean, do you have people that are just really, really scared about doing it?
Oh yeah, totally. And what I'll say is that even when I go and sit with a psychedelic in ceremony, I have my own anxiety, even after doing this hundreds of times. Um, and what we like to say in the shamanic world, it's your ego not wanting to die, right? It's your ego, which are your protective parts, wanting to protect you. And we can actually meet that with some compassion and grace as well. Because like, oof, without these protectors, I wouldn't be able to survive in the wild. Yeah. But what's of utmost importance and really what distinguishes our practice at Ceremonia than other places is typically when you go into a a group ceremony, and in certain therapeutic practices, let's say you go into a ketamine clinic, which ketamine was a psychedelic legalized in 2019, and in every major city has ketamine clinics now. You kind of go in, you shake hands with the other people in the room, and then 2 hours later, you're tripping together. Now, in that situation, there's a very sharp limit to the amount of safety that you can feel. Yes? Because there's two kinds of safety, inner safety and outer safety, right? Outer safety is like, do I feel safe in this environment with these people, right? With these facilitators, with everyone tripping balls together, right? Inner safety is like, how safe do I feel to meet things that come up, the content that comes up inside of me, to meet my emotions? Yeah. The outer sense of safety is best built with connection. And in Ceremonia, we have very like practiced frameworks that where we build connection authentically in presence with a high degree of vulnerability, right? And it's not just nourishing, it's easeful. It's beautiful practice. And when I facilitate and speak around the world, I usually lead with that practice because people are like, wow, this feels good to be with all these strangers that I, didn't even know I could be in this way. The inner sense of safety, we begin with mindfulness, right? Meditation. And meditation is a very interesting practice because it's literally the most boring thing you can possibly do, which is paying attention to your breath, right? And that's the challenge. That's the interesting thing, because the reason why we get bored, a lot of people probably don't think about this, right? The reason why we get bored is because we are attached to experience. And we are actually often attached to an external experience, aka an experience outside of our body, right? But when we're just paying attention to our breath in and out, we're entraining the mind to hold attention on something that is hard to hold attention on because the mind wants to wander out there or wander into thoughts, right? So the capacity to train for attention means that if something challenging comes up, let's say in the psychedelic experience, right? Let's say that you find this deep well of anger. And normally, how if I ask a room, how many people here would call yourself an angry person? Typically, very few people would raise their hands, right? And that's because what society has trained us usually to do is our parents would say, don't be angry, put a smile on your face, right? And so we learned anger is bad, smile is good. If you're feeling angry, don't be angry. Like your sign behind of you, choose happy, right? But the trick is to hold the attention on the anger with compassion, right? This thing that we normally would push away or suppress or repress or project out. Instead, we hold a loving attention on it. And that is the healing agent, our own inner power to do that. Does that make sense?
Oh my gosh, so brilliant. Yes. And I again, there's so much there that, yes, it's so speaking to me and fascinating because the one thing that I just could never quite get to was the anger component. And we just never really touched upon that part of it. Other than I was advised to take a wiffle ball bat out to the beach, and bang it on the sand to like get in touch with
Mm-hmm.
my anger. But to me, it was my dad was very angry his first 10 years of life. And
Mm.
so I always, I, it was like I keep my anger like right here because I don't want to become what he was. I don't want to become things I've seen in other people with that rage, with violence, with anger. And so anger
Mm.
scares me. And so I love the idea of what you just said of meeting that anger in compassion. It's
Yeah.
beautiful. Yeah.
Anger is a very interesting emotion, um, because the way I view anger is you and I are right now experiencing our own reality, right? Like, and especially since we're, virtually calling each other here. And if we're having, let's say, a fight, you're experiencing your truth and you're doing your very best. Every person in every given moment is doing their very best, right? For the resources, for the understanding of themselves, for their motivations in life. And I'm doing my very best in my experience. But what's happening is I'm angry. If I were to be angry at you, I would be angry at you because you're not recognizing my reality, right? I'm basically saying, hey, my reality is the right one. You need to believe that. Does that make sense?
Yes.
But if you go a layer deeper than that, what's actually happening is that I am not feeling empowered enough in my experience of my reality that I need you to affirm my reality. I need you to believe my reality because I'm not believing in it fully myself, right? And then layer underneath that is in my disempowerment of myself, I may not have been mindful enough of what I'm feeling to offer myself compassion and expressive enough to share with you what it is, what my needs and my boundaries are. And usually anger, it's coming from an unfulfilled need or a crossed boundary, right? And I haven't done that, usually because I'm afraid of something, right? In the case of relationships, it's usually because we're afraid of detachment, aka that person leaving you, right? And and the fear that I'm holding is because I am, and this is what Buddhism says, I am attached to something. I'm like, I need you. And because I'm afraid of losing you, I won't fully express myself. You see this everywhere, relationships, business deals, how you interact with your barista, let's say, right? Like I'm attached to some imagination of what I need outside of me. And so the healing process is to recognize what we are attached to and then let that go. That doesn't mean to say I let go of the relationship, like AKA I break up with somebody, but I let go of my attachment to the relationship needing to be a certain way. And then when we start to embody this in our life, this process for Ceremonia, we call it integration, right? We start to be more authentically expressive. And that does two things. A, we lose people, we lose opportunities, we lose things, right? But B, it becomes a filtering mechanism because everything that we say no to creates room for a yes. And what we hope that people do and what I advocate for is that people are making room for a fuck yes. Does that make sense?
Yes, yes.
Yeah,
Oh my gosh, I love it so much. I mean, you're speaking all my words, the mindfulness parts of it, and yes, meeting with compassion. Oh my gosh, I've talked about it so often. So absolutely
yeah.
beautiful. So Ceremonia, then, can you just to turn down that road a little bit, what is it? Is it a do you travel? Like, is it a retreat? Is it and people sign up and attend it?
So we're a legal and nonprofit, what we call a psychedelic sanctuary, technically an entheogenic church. And we're based near Denver, Colorado. We run retreats there twice a month with psilocybin mushrooms, both federal and state level legal, state level in the sense that Colorado's Natural Medicine Health Act passed last year. We're one of the pre-approved training centers to train and license other practitioners and um, and have applied for and hope to be a licensed as a healing center once that's rolled out. Federal in the sense that as a church, we serve psilocybin as a sacrament, much like the wine would be served in the Catholic Church, right? Um, and which also means that a portion of the proceeds are tax deductible. Now, as this organization, we have retreats and we also have an online offering called Awaken at Home. So our retreats are called Awaken, and then our online offering is Awaken at Home, which is a 12-week course where you go through the frameworks that we facilitate. And in the vein of teaching skills and capacity, the skills that you learn are literally the same skills that facilitators learn. In other words, you train yourself to become a facilitator of yourself,
Oh,
right?
yeah.
So imagine if you've been in therapy, right, Teri? Imagine if before going to the therapist's office, you learned the same tools or read the same books as the therapist did, right? Maybe not to the same extent, but what that would do is that once you stepped into that office, you would already have a foundation for you to meet yourself. And the process of you being with your therapist would be much accelerated, right? Because you're sharing the same vocabulary, you're familiar with the process, so on and so forth, right? The same thing happens here. So you learn the same tools that facilitators have so that when you go into a psychedelic experience, you're already feeling empowered and connected with the people in the space, right? The other beautiful part that does is community is a really big part of our program. As I said, we have close to 300 alumni now. And imagine the power of 300 people that have learned the same tools, that have 96% of them have had a transcendent experience, right? What they're able to support each other in a way that even some therapists can't support them because they have the shared experience, the shared vocabulary. Does that make sense?
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So it's a powerful, what we're seeking to do is to create depth and durability of transformation. I don't just want people to have a helicopter ride to the peak of the mountain of consciousness. I want them to be able to come back down to this plane of reality, but have the equipment to hike back up. Does that make sense? And to do
Yes.
that over time. Yeah.
Yeah, beautiful. And my degree is in psychology. So when I started,
Cool.
my therapy sessions, I did like it made it that much better because I was able to understand so much of what we were doing in the paths we were going down. So I love that. Yeah.
Yeah. Perfect.
Yeah.
Yeah.
All right. Well, I could sit here, gosh, and learn so much from you. It's fascinating. I'm already thinking like, oh, I have to make sure this person hears this podcast. Oh, I got to send the link to this person. So I love it. Thank you.
You're so welcome.
So I certainly want to give you an opportunity to maybe leave people with any final closing thoughts, or if there's something you wanted to touch upon that we didn't have a chance to.
Well, first, they can find us on ceremoniacircle.org or on Instagram at Ceremonia Circle. But we have lots of content, lots of recordings of my speeches where I can go into some of our frameworks, et cetera, et cetera. Um, I would say that, for those that are interested in investigating like the potential of psychedelics for them, one is use your intuition. Okay. There's a line that I really love. My intuition uh, doesn't always, sorry, my intuition sometimes leads me wrong, but it's the only thing that's ever led me right. Okay. And so when you meet a facilitator, I would say the first thing that I share with people to try on is to challenge their beliefs. Ask them what do they believe. Oh, I believe in plant spirits, or I believe in Jesus Christ, or I believe and then you ask, how do you know that to be true, right? And if their response has an energy of anger or quote unquote just trust me, then maybe that person isn't the right person to create the space for you to discover your own beliefs. Does that make sense?
Yes.
So I think it's really important that people trust their intuition. And the second thing is this is this field traverses science and psychology, right? I believe there's a reason why we're a church and we're a very non-dogmatic secular church, right? I believe that the spiritual experience is uniquely your own and it is something profoundly healing. Because in psychology, oftentimes, what we can look for is, hey, there's something wrong with me, and here's how I fix it, let's say. All right. But in spirituality, or at least the spiritual text that I believe in, they say you're perfect. And all you got to do is just realize you're perfect in perfection. And what that does is it offers us, again, a lot of uh, source of compassion for ourselves, to meet ourselves when we've failed, when we've betrayed ourselves, when we've shut down. Life is going to continue to life. Buddhism says we're going to lose everything that we love and we'll lose it to time. And so having these tools, to prepare ourselves for all that life has to offer and to embrace that with compassion, that is, I think, the spiritual path. And I hope that if and when people pursue psychedelics as a modality for healing, to really understand the importance of having a spiritual experience and the importance of having a facilitator that gives you room for your spiritual experience.
Yes. Oh, well, thank you. Again, it's just now I understand like why you're in such demand for being a keynote speaker because it's captivating. Like I just want to sit here and learn more and more and more from you. So this has just been wonderful. Thanks for joining me and sharing your brilliant insights.
Thank you, Teri. Thank you for having me on.
Awesome. All
Yeah.
right. Well, everyone, thanks for joining us today on the Healing Place podcast. And remember, until next time, be gentle with yourself. Thanks. Bye-bye. Hey, everybody. Teri Wellbrock here. Just wanted to thank you again for being a part of this healing space and my hashtag hope for healing journey. Thank you for sharing, liking, inviting others to join, listening in. You've really helped this show blossom. It has now been downloaded in 136 countries and is in the top 2% globally out of 3.2 million shows, which is just amazing. And it's all because of you and your tuning in and inviting others and sharing and liking and loving. And your reviews on Apple really help too. My goal is to hit 100 5-star reviews by the end of the year. And I am closing in on that. So if you are listening in on Apple or Apple Podcasts, please go and rate the show and leave a review if you absolutely love it. And I would be most appreciative. Also, if you would like to receive my monthly Hope for Healing newsletter, please be sure to go to teriwellbrock.com. It's TERI, just one R, WELLBROCK.com. And I have a gift to send you for signing up for that monthly Hope for Healing newsletter. Plus, there are many other resources listed on that page, including a resource library. All right. Thanks. Bye-bye.